Build environment. Hey everyone, this is Ben Finkel, and in this nugget, we're going to take some time to set ourselves up a really nice development or build environment for our React.js application development. Learning React is challenging, and one of the reasons for that challenge is that React doesn't have nice mature development tools, build tools available to it the way something like, say, .NET does. We kind of have to cobble together our own development environment. And if you've searched for tutorials online for React, there's a lot of great ones out there, but a lot of times they kind of start with, hey, install all this stuff, and then that's going to be your development environment. Well, I want to talk about exactly how we install all that stuff because it is important to get this set up. We need a development environment for React. We can't just count on JS Fiddle to do all of our work. So how do we build a development environment for something that's so new and doesn't have that whole suite of tools available to it? Well, we're going to start with Node.js. Node.js is a really important part of the React ecosystem. Node is what's going to execute everything else, including if we want to do server-side isomorphic JavaScript rendering, we can do that with Node.js. But all the rest of the tools that I'm going to talk about are actually JavaScript packages, JavaScript libraries, and Node, especially NPM, the Node Package Manager, is going to allow us to use these very, very easily. The first one that we're going to use, and you're going to see this come up a lot, is something called Gulp. Gulp is just a build automator. It's something like Grunt if you've used Grunt. And the basic idea with Gulp is that we can script out the build process for our React.js application. When we get into actually setting this up, you'll see that we're going to create something called a Gulp file, and that Gulp file is going to describe what needs to happen to build our React application. I mean, what does need to happen to build our React application? Well, we need to run our React code through a couple of additional tools. One tool that we're going to use is called Browserify. I love that logo. Browserify is going to take all of the different packages, all of the things that we need for our React.js code, and is going to bundle it inside of a single JavaScript file that we can use on our web page when we deploy. Basically, it takes everything and it puts it together in one nice, neat little package for us. We actually, a lot of times it's called bundle.js, the end result of Browserify. So you can imagine as your dependencies grow and you get many, many different JavaScript files from a development perspective, it's good to have all those different files. You want them kind of spread out and scattered so that you can perform source control on them and you can manage and maintain your application as it grows. But that's not great from an implementation perspective because you got to ship all these files with your HTML page. Well, Browserify is going to handle that for us. It's going to take care of bundling all that together. Another really important tool that we are working with, and you've seen this come up a little bit when we've been working in React.js, is something called Babel. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about why exactly we need Babel and what that's doing for us. But Babel is another preprocessor that is going to transpile, that's the word they use, transpile, our code from, well, from JSX, for instance, into JavaScript, but also from ES6, if we're using ES6 code, into ES5. I'm going to talk about exactly what that means. The last library you're going to see me install is something called Vinyl Source Stream. And Vinyl Source Stream just gets the code that comes out of Babel and out of Browserify and makes it consumable for Gulp. So it's really just a simple little easy tool. You're barely going to notice it, but we do need to have it installed to create our Gulp file. And again, I'm going to show you how to set all of this up. Now when it comes to installing these things, we are primarily going to use a project folder. We're going to create a folder to host our source code. We are going to install Gulp into the global system here on our computer. So Gulp is going to be installed globally with npm. That's the --g command, or a switch on the command if you don't know. But everything else is going to be installed locally onto our project folder. Our project folder is going to end up with a little node_modules subfolder. That's where all of those things will be installed. Our project folder would also have a little tests subfolder if we were going to install Jest and do unit testing with Jest. And you can take a look at that in my nugget on unit testing React.js, how exactly that works. And then we can also have our entire development environment set up, so we could have maybe a style subfolder, etc. You get the point. But everything is going to be hosted underneath this project folder. Now, I said I wanted to talk about it, so let's talk about exactly what Babel is doing for us before we actually go ahead and build all of this. Another confusing part of trying to learn React.js is that when you search online for tutorials, you'll find a lot of different ways to accomplish the same thing. And the reason for that, I think, is because React has kind of come up at a very interesting point in the development of JavaScript, a real transitional period, because we're moving from ES5 to ES6. And the folks at React and the folks who develop with React, hopefully that's us, we kind of want to take advantage of ES6, even though it's not fully supported yet. But what the heck is it? I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So ES stands for ECMAScript, and ECMAScript is the script definition standard that JavaScript is based on. So JavaScript is an implementation of ECMAScript. And the first ECMAScript standard was actually way back in 1997. This was basically JavaScript that the Netscape company developed. Now, when Netscape developed JavaScript and their Navigator browser supported JavaScript, Internet Explorer, the guys at Microsoft, wanted to do the same thing. So they developed their own version of JavaScript, but they had to call it JScript, for licensing reasons. But JScript and JavaScript both wanted to implement the same language, the same standard, essentially. So it was turned over to these folks at ECMA, the European Computer something or another, and they developed the ECMAScript standard. In 2009, the current most popular definition, ES5, ECMAScript 5, came out, and that's the one that's primarily supported by just about every browser, every tablet, every phone. You see a lot of ECMAScript 5 implementations. But ECMAScript 6 has a lot of really interesting new features in it. That was introduced just earlier in 2015. Now, React and React developers want to take advantage of ES6. We want to take advantage of it because it has some really nice, clean, terse syntax. It's a little bit easier to read. It's a little bit more standardized. They actually, for a lot of reasons, highly encourage using ES6. But of course, like I said, there's a problem. Take a look at this URL right here. I'm going to browse to this. This is a cool little chart of all of the different, ECMAScript features that are supported in each browser. You can see down the left-hand side are the features, and across the top are all the different browsers that we can talk about, including, over here we've got Node.js, which is what we're going to run on, but mobile browsers, etc. And you'll notice, and this is pretty sad, I've chosen ECMAScript 6 here, there's a lot of red. There's not a lot of support for ES6 yet out there in the wild, and really only the newest and latest, greatest browsers support it. If I flop this back over to 5, ES5, oh, look at all that green. That is great. That's what we want to see, right? All this delicious green yes for support. So ES5 is very widely supported. ES6 not so much supported. What does that mean for us? Well, it means that we need some way to take advantage of ES6 because it's easier to write and read, but then turn our code back into ES5. That's where Babel comes in. Babel is the preprocessor engine that turns our ES6 code into ES5 code. It literally transpiles it from what we've written into something that's going to be way more supported across way more browsers. By the way, it's also going to handle the JSX transformation. That's built right into Babel. So the Babel folks and the React folks are really close, and they allow Babel to transpile the code from ES6 into ES5. I'm going to show you exactly how that works inside of our build environment. It's really, really cool. Alright, so first things first, make sure you have Node.js installed along with the Node Package Manager. If you don't know how to do that, it's really easy. Just download it from the website, run the install utility. You can see me do that on my my Nugget on unit testing. I actually do that to set up my unit tests. There's a ton of YouTube videos, a ton of tutorials out there. Getting Node installed is no problem. You know that it's installed if you run node space -v. You get back the version of Node that you're currently running. I've got 4.2.4. Perfect. I'm inside of my project folder. I've called it React Build, and if I run a quick dir, you can see it's totally empty right now. I don't have anything at all. So the first thing that I want to do is I actually want to get Gulp installed globally on my system. I'm going to use the Node Package Manager to do that. I'm going to say npm install --g for global, and then Gulp is the package that I want to install. And actually, I think I already have it installed. This is probably going to skip over and not do much for me. On your system, if you don't already have Gulp installed, it'll just take a minute to download and install it on your system. And that's what it looks like when it's done installing. You should have something similar on your screen. You can test Gulp again if you simply, you can just run Gulp. You can see here I got some output. Local Gulp not found. Okay, so I don't have any Gulp installed here yet. That's okay. I haven't done anything yet. The next thing that I need to do is I need to build a package.json file. And if you're not familiar with package.json, this is simply a way to tell Node Package Manager what packages you are dependent upon. Sort of sets up a meta information about your project right here in our project folder. I could create it from scratch. I could cut and paste it in. I'm going to use a tool called init, the npm init command. And this is going to ask me a couple of questions, and it's going to build my basic package. So the first thing it wants to know is what's the name of my package. React Build is fine. Oop, can't contain capitals. I'll just call it lowercase React Build. What version is this going to be? I'll call it 1.0. A description. An example build environment for React. My entry point. This is going to be like the focal point of my application, and I'm going to call it app.jsx. Not JS, JSX, and there's a reason for that. You'll see why in a little bit. Test command. If I were going to install Jest and do my unit testing, I would make Jest my test command, and that'll allow me to do npm test, and it will run my unit test for me automatically. Git repository, don't need. Keywords, author, rest of this stuff I don't need. Here it shows me the output for my my package.json. I can hit enter and say yes. Now I've got inside of here, I got a package.json. I can take a look at it. That's what it looks like right now. So that's just a simple basic package.json file. As I install more packages using npm, I'm going to use the save command, and that's going to write these dependencies into package.json. And the reason you do that is so that I could pick up this whole folder and I could move it to another computer, and that computer could run npm install. It would look at package.json and automatically download all of the libraries and all the dependencies that my code needed. So package.json is a cool way to kind of set up and get our build environment defined. First thing I want to install here is React. I'm just going to call npm install save React. So what is this going to do? This is going to install the React library for me right here in my local directory because I didn't use the --g command. And --save is going to write it out into package.json. So there, it's already done. If I run or check out package.json again, now you can see that there is a, let me get my pen up on screen here. There's a small dependency section that was added, and it added React there, and it said 14.6 or above because I didn't define a version. It picked the current version for me. So now React is one of my dependencies. Again, if I pick this up and move this package.json into another place, run npm install, it will automatically go out and get React for me. Now I also need some other packages, like I need gulp, for instance, so npm install save gulp. This is going to go ahead and download and install gulp right here in my folder for me. And by the way, if I do a dir, you can see I've got a node_modules folder now. We can just go check that out. And you can see that I've got gulp and React in here. So it's installing everything right inside of my React build folder. I think that's kind of convenient. Also, when I'm doing my npm installs, I don't have to do the packages one by one. I can do a whole bunch at once. Like I can say npm install save. What else do I need? Well, I need Browserify, and I need Babelify, and I'm going to need that Vinyl source stream package that I talked about. And I also need a couple of things known as Babel presets. Now, I'm not going to get too in depth of how all of this different stuff works inside of this nugget. It's really outside the scope of the nugget. But you can check out the documentation online for any of these things to get a better feel for why we're doing what we're doing. So there, I'm also going to install Babel preset ES 2015 and Babel preset React. If you can't guess, preset React is what is going to do our JSX Babelify, and preset ES 2015 does our ES6 to ES5 Babelify. So ES6 is also known as ES 2015 before it formally had a number. They knew it was coming out in 2015, whatever. They've named it a couple of different things. So this will just take a minute to now download these packages, install them in my folder, and update my package.json file. Now that took a few minutes to download all of those, but when it's done it looks something like this, and I've actually got my package.json open in Sublime Text here. So this is what my JSON package.json looks like right now. All the different libraries that I'm going to use are in my dependencies. They've all been installed in my node_modules folder. Awesome. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to build my gulp file. So I'm just going to paste in this code here. You can copy it from the screen, or you can actually download it from the Nugget Lab files here that are on the right-hand side of the screen when you're watching this Nugget. So you can copy that code if you want. Let me talk about exactly what's going on here. I'm going to save this first. We're going to call it gulpfile.js. Naming it gulpfile.js is very, very important. That's how Gulp is going to find it. So I'm installing a couple of, or I'm requiring, sorry, a couple of different libraries at the top of my JavaScript file: Gulp, Browserify, Babelify, and my Vinyl source stream. And then I create something called a gulp task here. You can see that's what lines 6 through 12 do right here, the gulp task. I've named the task build. I could name it anything I want, but what I name it is important. And you can see that I'm calling the entry point is going to be app.jsx. Remember I said that app.jsx in my package.json was the entry point for my application as well. So that's going to be important. And I've said extensions.jsx. Again, that's because I'm going to use JSX code, not JS. Using the JSX extension is a good way to identify the fact that my code is not raw JavaScript. It wouldn't actually execute in JavaScript until it's been Babelified and turned into just JS code. Then I've got a couple of stream functions here to transform it using Babelify. Then I bundle it. I'm going to put it into a file called bundle.js, and that's going to be put inside of a folder called dist. So when I run my gulp build, it's going to build it into bundle.js in a folder called dist. I can then reference that JavaScript file in my HTML. So this is what my HTML code is going to look like. Same thing, download it from the Nugget Lab files or type it in yourself, copying it on screen here. But notice I have a script tag referencing dist whack bundle.js. So I've got a reference to my bundle.js file. It doesn't exist yet, but after I build it, it will. I'm going to call this index.html. So now I've got an index.html so I can look at the output from my gulp. That's what gulp file is going to do. It's going to create that output. Let's get our code together. I want to start with a simple example so that you can see ES6 in action, and then I'll flop over and I'll actually use an example we've been using inside of this course. Here I've pasted in some code. I'm going to call this hello world. Click save, hello world.jsx. And check this out. Extends React component. What is going on there? Everything you've seen me do previously has always been react.create component. Now I'm calling class hello world extends react.component. This is the first instance of ES6, and this is one of the primary reasons that we might want to use ES6 over ES5. ES6 has a class definition function inside of it. It's the first version of ECMA that actually standardizes class definition. That means that every single JavaScript library doesn't have to create their own class definition functions that may be a little bit quirky and a little bit different from one another. So you can rely on the JavaScript standard. React takes advantage of it. I can simply create a class that extends react.component. If you've used really just about any other programming language, object-oriented programming language, this should be very familiar syntax for you. And you can see what I'm doing in this. All I'm doing is I'm returning from this.props.phrase. I'm exporting hello world out of this file. So it's a very simple little piece of code, little application that I'm going to build with my gulp here. The last thing that I need is I actually need my app.jsx that's actually going to draw this on screen. And here it is right here. I'm just going to call it app.jsx. I actually want this to be no dash. I didn't include a dash in it. So all I'm doing is I'm importing React. I'm importing my hello world code that I just made right there. And you can see I'm rendering it with a phrase ES6. That's what I'm passing into my properties of it, rendering it right into the document body. So here we have basically the full structure of a development environment for a piece of React code, a React application. All I need to do in order to run it is drop back to my command line and say gulp. And oops, wait a second, just running gulp doesn't work. You can see task default is not in your gulp file. So if you just run gulp, what happens is it tries to run a task called default. I didn't create a task called default. I created one called build, so I have to say gulp build. Now what's it going to do? It's actually going to go ahead and build all of this stuff. It's going to create that dist folder. It's going to put bundle.js inside of that dist folder, which means that my index.html should show up appropriately. Let's find out. I'm going to come here to my React build folder and say index.html, hello from ES6. Awesome. Let's go check out that bundle.js now and see exactly what it did for us. I'm just going to open it right up in Sublime. Here's one file, bundle.js, and when I look at this file, well, I can see some of my stuff that I kind of recognize. There's hello world that's being required out of my files, but check it out. This is, what do we got here? 20,000 lines of code almost. So the entire library that I need, all of the React code has been bundled up into this single JS file for me. If I wanted to do some things like minify or uglify my JavaScript code, I could include that in my gulp build as well, and that would create a minified, an uglified version of bundle.js. So now let's do a cool thing. Let's set up gulp to watch my files. I'm going to change them a little bit, but I don't want to drop to a command line and type gulp every time. So I'm going to add a new task into my gulp file, and it's called watch. And notice here that instead of doing a transform and a bundle and all that stuff, I'm calling gulp.watch, and I'm passing into it, well, two things. One, I'm saying star.jsx, which means it's going to watch JSX files inside of my folder, and then I'm passing in build here. Build is a reference to this task here. What I'm saying is I'm saying that gulp is going to watch my JSX files inside of my folder, and whenever they change, it's going to automatically run the build task. So all I need to do, once I have gulp task watch here, drop back to my command line, and I'm going to say gulp watch. And what it's doing now is it's sitting here. You'll notice I'm not dropped back to a command prompt. It's waiting for my JSX files to change. So sitting here watching my JSX files. That's good because I'm going to change them. So I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to change my hello world. I'm going to change it to filtered list. This is a cool filterable list function that we built in a Nugget, and we've done it and we've used it in a few different places. And I'm going to go ahead and say save as. I'll call it filtered list.jsx. So now I have a new JSX file, but don't worry, Browserify is going to go through my entire dependency library. Once I create a dependency to this file, Browserify is going to pick up the fact that I have a new file, filtered list.jsx, and it is going to look at that one. But Browserify is looking at app.jsx, so I better paste that in here. Here's my code that's going to use my filtered list, and I'm passing in my items array to populate it with. I'll go ahead and save this. And dropping back to my commands prompt, you can see that some build actions have already run because it's watching those files, it saw those changes, it's executing the build. It's babelifying, it's transformifying, doing everything that it needs to do to my files. I should be able to come back here and just refresh my browser page and check it out. I've got my new code showing up on index.html. So hopefully you see how setting up gulp, setting up package.json, setting up these different this structure allows you to develop and build your JavaScript application, your React application, and then see the output build automatically for you, a minimal amount of effort, just by putting in a little bit of upfront work and creating this build environment. So that concludes this nugget on creating a build environment for React.js. So to recap, in our build environment, we used Node and Node Package Manager to install Gulp, Browserify, and Babel. These three things together allow us to automate the build of our React code from ES6 and JSX into functional ES5 code that can be very easily injected into an HTML page. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.